Hey everyone, welcome to Retire with Style. Alex here with our co-host. It seems our new best friend. You're gonna take over for Bob on these things, Ryan Walter, and we're here to discuss. This is part two of our discussion of the ADV part two, and the whole theme is we've gotten a lot of questions this past year as Wade and I have been doing these arcs on investment issues where some of these questions are literally I'm looking for an advisor. What do we what are the tells, right? Or just questions saying I'm not going to use an advisor because I'm going to put myself at risk for some sort of impropriety. And so what we wanted to do in this is just how do we make people informed consumers? Do what you want ultimately, because I think at the end of the day, if you think an advisor is useful, you'll go down that right. If you don't think an advisor is useful, I don't think there's anything we can say to change that mind, and that's fine. But what I want to avoid is folks having misconceptions about what that relationship dynamic looks like from a logistical standpoint. Not like, my advisor's good, he listens to me, that kind of thing. That's important, as Ryan pointed out in the first episode of this arc. But it's really more the business of advice, sort of let's get down to the brass tacks of what's actually being delivered and for what. And that's done in a document known as the ADV. And it came to light for me. I had no idea. I thought it was an acronym at this point. ADV is the first three letters for advisors.
That's
Guilty
it.
as
It really
charged.
is that simple.
I had no idea. But so there's 18 items in the ADV. We went down the first five, and we're taking our time with this. We don't want to go through it quickly because it really is important. So we're about item 6 right now, which is performance-based fees. Something that we talked about earlier is our ADV. We're doing McLean's ADV. As you know, Wade and I are managing principles of McLean Asset Management. So, we'll just go through ours as opposed to somebody random that we don't know. And we'll have the download in our show notes. So if you want to read this while Ryan is going through it, I think that would be a little better. Although you can just listen to it just the same. All right, because there are no charts. It's just words, if you will. Ryan, take it away. We're by performance-based fees and side-by-side management. I don't even know what
Yeah,
side-by-side management means.
nobody does.
Oh, okay.
So,
Hey,
for
like, the hell is that?
but performance-based fees and side-by-side management. More often than not, if you're a retail investor, you're just going to skip by this section. The Advisors Act, the set of laws that governs conduct in the investment advisor industry, prohibits the charging of performance-based compensation except for certain clients that meet certain monetary thresholds. Yeah, usually you're not going to be able to pay performance-based comp unless you have investments under the advisor's management in excess of 1.1 million or you have a net worth in excess of 2.2 million. So, the performance-based comp is kind of reserved for the top tier high net worth individual clients. Certain entities are eligible for performance-based comp. But for the bulk of retail investors, you're not even eligible to participate in a performance-based compensation arrangement. I personally am not eligible. So yeah, for most people, we skip by this section because it's not material. And as you can see for McLean, they don't charge performance-based comp. And I think 90 to 95% of firms out there don't charge performance-based.
Yeah, this comes up indirectly sometimes when there's a prospect, and some of it is they're trying to be smart. They're trying to be cute by half, and the question is, oh, we'll pay you if the results are there, if the performance is there, that kind of thing. And it's asked innocently enough, but the reality is, look, no advisor worth their salt will do something like that because the reality is markets are the markets. No one creates returns. I'm putting on my little bit of an investment hat on. You capture market returns, and there's inherent volatility where there will be downturns and the like, and you're actually paying for the holistic, advice in which investments are included. But you get that question sometimes, like, oh, if my performance is up, that's when I'm willing to pay the fees, and that tells more about the kind of relationship that you're ultimately going to engage with. And so, we don't we don't even just walk. If that's the case, it doesn't happen all the time, but you get people like that. And my response to them is, I get it, but that's not what an advisor does. And if an advisor agrees to that, to your point, it's not going to happen. But if an advisor does agree with that, that's not an advisor you probably want to be with anyways. Uh, that would
Not
even
me
consider something like that.
personally.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird.
It's not a fifth. Like you're like when my portfolio does well, like you're lumping 20 to 25% right off the top of that. I don't want to sign up for anything like that.
No,
But
no, no.
that's me.
And
Different people have different
and
preferences.
and maybe it's a vestige too from like how hedge funds charge.
I
And
think so.
maybe it's that kind of thing that no one ever bothered to just get a pen and cross this out. But whatever. Uh, Types of clients. Now, what's in parentheses in all of these that an advisor won't admit is ability to fog a mirror. No, I'm kidding. Like
Yeah.
advisors, like, hey, we're takers. We'll take anyone. That kind of thing. But now, what would you look for here in types of clients?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're going to get a general description of like categories of clients, people, institutions, trusts and estates. That's easy enough. What we're looking for in this section is what minimums the firm applies, and whether I even like approach those minimums or whether I fit into that ideal client that the firm is looking for. McLean, they're looking for account sizes of 1 million or 500,000 for certain strategies. That maybe isn't a fit for me if I have $250,000 in my investment accounts. But some firms may also make exceptions to that. They may set like an ideal client as somebody who has $1 million, but we make exceptions. We may reduce that or waive that if we feel like you're a
Exactly.
good fit for the firm.
And this goes back to
Um,
even the fee schedules. Remember, the fee schedules are done at the highest level, but always accommodations are made. So let's say Ryan comes to us, right? And he's a prospect, and he comes to McLean, and he only has $250,000 because law school debt. He's starting his own practice. There's investments to be made for that, etc. Right? Many advisors will be like, "Well, Ryan, sure, he doesn't have the $1 million, but here's a guy that is in a law firm, a 3-person partnership. They're doing extremely well. He's starting to solidify himself, and he's beginning to accumulate assets. There aren't many advisors that would say no to a Ryan simply because it says on their ADV $1 million and Ryan is at 250 and accumulated, because you just there's business decisions that are made around that. Ryan, any color to that?
no, I think you're 100% right. If I maybe I have 250 today, but maybe the realistic expectation is that 500 5 years from now, that 250 will be 750. Or even higher, and it starts to look like much more of a worthwhile engagement at that point. If I'm looking at it from a client's that makes it make sense from the advisor's perspective. If
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
looking
yeah,
at it, if
exactly.
I'm coming at it from a consumer's perspective, I kind of want to know how I fit in. If I'm going to be
Good point.
250 and I'm going to stay 250, but this firm works with $1 million clients, am I going to get lost in the shuffle over the long term? Am I going to get the level of service that I feel like I deserve? You're looking at it from a fit perspective as a consumer. Am I really fitting into the model client that this
That's a
advisor
great
is
point.
looking for? Can they
That's a
come in?
great point. No, that's a great point, and it's a fair point. And a question you could ask, it's not an ADV, but a question you can ask is, do you tier your clients? Do you have, I don't know,
Yeah,
silver, gold, and bronze tiers?
right.
And what are the levels? Because even though you may check the boxes on the levels of service on the ADV, you may want to make sure that you're getting the full regalia or whatever it is of those services. If not, yeah, it may not be a good fit. And this is, again, regardless of my niche is retirees, my niche is Hewlett Packard corporate executives. Forget
Mm-hmm.
that. This is more like where you stand in the grand scheme of things from an economic standpoint for the advisor, because you're right. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's also a business, and you want to make sure that it functions efficiently. And sometimes you do tier clients accordingly, and you just want to make sure as a consumer that you're not like a secondary thought, if you will, because it's just not worth it
Exactly.
for either
And that
party,
was
because
you.
then you're not going to be happy with the service, and then the advisor is not going to be happy providing that service because there's an opportunity cost. Now, again, I may sound like I'm being very cold and calculating, but again, the purpose of this episode is specifically the business of advice, and as you're seeing an advisor, what are the things you want to be looking at? So I'm being very just out there.
No, and I think it's really important. And you used some examples from earlier in the arc from the prior episodes, like the big Wall Street name brand
Yeah.
shops that offer investment advisory services. And I think it creates a very stark contrast in those arrangements, because if I'm 250,000 in that context, they're catching fish that with 100 million, 500 million in assets, and then I'm really down, the food chain in an engagement like that. So this is important just to kind of get a sense for who the firm, this item 7 that we're looking at, who's the firm looking to work with, and are they going to make an exception for me to come in? And if they make an exception for me, does that mean I'm going to be kind of a second-rate citizen among their citizenry of clients?
No, it's a fair point, man. It's a fair point. Item 8, method of analysis, investment strategies, and risk of loss. What should you expect to see here? And don't I have a follow up question to this, because this is where sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
from an
This,
SEC standpoint, sometimes I'm like, what do they care? And I'll get to what I mean by that in a second. But go on.
No, this is the methodology. This is a description of the methodology for what's going to happen to your assets after you place them under the advisor's management. Are they managing models? Are they managing every portfolio, every account on an individualized basis? What security types are they using? Are they, a mutual fund allocator? Are they allocating exclusively to mutual funds and ETFs for diversification or whatever other reasons? Are they recommending private placements, things that have much less liquidity than exchange traded products, that may have outsized return potential, but might also lose everything? This is where those details are going to reside, and this is going to give you a sense for how much risk the advisor is willing to take on in pursuit of returns with your money. And so this is really where you spend a lot of time beyond just what are they doing for me? What am I paying? This is how are they implementing that advice in my portfolio, and how much risk are they taking on in doing so, and how much risk am I comfortable with them taking on? This is where it's all going to be spelled out.
Yeah, and so this is where you may see something on the website about how they manage money. This is kind of where you can see the nuts and bolts without any flowery language, because they kind of have to state how it goes. Now, this is where I have strong opinions, because I think there's effective ways to manage money. I think there's ineffective ways to manage money. But regardless, if what I think is ineffective, it doesn't really matter in the eyes of the SEC if it's stated clearly here. Like if someone, as you know, we're not necessarily the active management firm. We did a whole arc on that with Bob and Wade, and so we're largely going to say here that we're passive investors, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas somebody that's active would say here they're active. That does not. That's just telling you that. But you can follow where I'm getting at. It's hard for somebody to know. Well, this is crazy. That kind of. Well, this is a stupid strategy, or not. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is they're just writing down what it is they're doing. Is that a correct statement here? That doesn't mean
That's
that
100%.
it's credible. Doesn't mean it's credible. It just means that they're writing it down. So just FYI, right?
That's 100% right. Yeah. You may have a firm that is uber focused on, I don't know, women-owned businesses. That's their whole strategy, is identifying and investing in maybe early-stage female-owned businesses. And that's great. That's awesome. And do I value that as an investor? Maybe, maybe not. But having it in black and white allows me to make that decision.
Yeah. I
And
mean, to make the to exaggerate, to make an example, I base my investments on astrological signs.
yeah,
You know, I'm sure. I swear to God, I'm sure there's some people that actually do that. And if they did that, it would have to be written here. You know.
Exactly. Doesn't mean
You
it's good
know.
or bad. I don't put a lot of value in
Yeah.
it, but
That's not the
but
role right now. Yeah. Today's episode is
right.
not relative to the credibility of these strategies. It just says. Although I will say this. I remember we were getting audited, and I think it was during this part. Wade and I are, being interviewed by the SEC, and they're asking us the ins and outs on our strategies. And part of me was like, "Why do you care? I mean, we have it written down, and it's passive investing. But he was like asking us, like from a credibility standpoint, and I thought, what do you care? You know what I mean? It's written down clearly. Let's move on, right? Am I wrong in thinking that? Like so,
Uh,
and the reason I'm saying that because if somebody does write astrology down, I
mhm.
mean, can the SEC say, okay, that's fine, and move on, or will they say this is a joke?
Well, I think astrology might be a little bit of a stretch.
All right, well, at what point are they
Like,
allowed to say no? You can't do this, or can they?
there's no you're not going to
Right?
find like a black and white dividing line between this is acceptable basis for investment advice and this is not. I tend to think as a somebody who's inclined to like a libertarian mindset
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah, yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah. I get you. I get you.
My standpoint is that if they say this is their strategy and they're honest and upfront about it, even if it's based on nonsense, like
Yeah,
rolling dice
yeah,
or reading
yeah.
chicken bones or whatever the case may be,
But that works,
if they
though.
put it
That
out
works.
and
Be
they,
careful. That works.
yeah, and as long as they're not lying about it,
Yeah, I agree.
then they should be able to do that, and I can choose to hire them or not hire them based on
No,
how much credibility I put into
again,
it.
I disagree. I mean, I agree. I disagree with the validity of these things, but no, I agree. It's
Yeah,
it's there to state it. If they're truthful to it and they're following it the way they say it, you know,
right,
that's not my place to say differently. Other
right.
than
I'm going to
personally,
make
I
a
think it's a
value
joke.
judgment on whether that works or doesn't work.
Yeah,
It's not for
I got
me.
you.
That's all I could say.
Okay, so that's where now that being the case, you may go on the SEC's like high cycle,
Yeah, no,
high
for sure.
risk, high
Yeah,
cycle audit, but
yeah.
there it is. And so then you have your risk of loss statement. That what does that go into here? Is that the standard like all investments are risky, that kind of thing?
Every firm is required to say something to the effect of all investments come with risk, including the risk of loss. So just because
Okay.
an investment advisor has that in their ADV, every investment advisor has that wording in the ADV. But some strategies are going to be higher risk than others. And that's an important distinction to draw for an investment advisor. If I have a super conservative strategy and I also offer a super aggressive strategy, kind of have to make that point clear to the reader that this one's going to be a little more conservative, this one's going to
Yeah.
be a bit more aggressive. So if you want this strategy, you have to be willing to take on more risk.
Yeah, I think that
Um,
people born during the Aquarius cycle take on more risk than the ones that were Libra, but I'm not 100% certain. No, that would be crazy, right? But all right, so then now this goes back item 9. To me, that's where again going with the big box retail advice. Even though you think, oh wow, look at these commercials and all of that, the reality is item 9, disciplinary information. That's where it gets crazy. Like I said, a firm that's using an institutional custodian, and I'll say McLean just because we're talking about McLean. There's no like small company. I'm not gonna say there's no. I don't want to talk in absolutes, but small company risk, that kind of thing, is not the concern because of the affiliation with the custodian. In fact, I'd venture to say it's the other way around because disciplinary actions for big box institutional sort of BD broker dealers or whatever, it becomes a cost of doing business. They've got thousands and thousands of advisors, so they just embed in their budget that they're going to get taken to the woodshed every so often from the SEC, and they will just move on. To me, that's that's a bigger concern. And yes, I mean talking my book, absolutely. I am saying why it's better to be in an independent RIA than a institutional brokerage because all of this we have access to this or that. All that's BS. The reality is I go to item 9, which is this disciplinary information where it's like my God, it's cost of doing business for these people to pay millions of dollars in fines. It's in their budget. Whereas for firms like us, it closes the doors. We're done. Am I off on this? And feel free to disagree, because you may have some clients that are these big store retailers that I'm kind of like taking the jab at effectively.
No, I think you're right though. Like after you grow to a certain point and you have so many people outside of the main firm principals that you're relying on to fill different roles and perform certain functions, eventually the rules are so complex and some of the standards are kind of so vague and ambiguous that it's inevitable at some point you're going to trip up on something. It doesn't mean that you're like the worst shop in the world or that you're untrustworthy. But yeah, you're right that eventually you expand so greatly and the rules are just so complex that something is going to give you an issue.
We had a thing. We had an office in New Hampshire, and we actually, I don't know how long ago. It's like 10 years ago, maybe something like that. And it was an administrative failure. We literally forgot to register specifically in New Hampshire. Every year you kind of re-register, and we just, I don't know, somehow we forgot to register in New Hampshire, and we got a fine from New Hampshire for that, and it's fine. And we were reporting that. We don't report it anymore because it's like, for only so many years. But to your point, no one's perfect in that sense, and this was more of an
Yes.
admin faux pas. But so be it. You have to report it.
But the reporting is the important part, right? Because the reporting isn't going to just say we were fined by the SEC or we were fined by the
No,
state of
no.
New Hampshire. It's going to give at least base level details of what the allegations or substance of that fine was. And if I see that and I say, oh, they forgot to register in New Hampshire, is that as bad as, one of our principals went to jail because they stole $500,000 from a client? No, obviously. And so that allows me to assess like how crucial is this disclosure really to my evaluation of this firm. Sometimes it's going to be super important and it's going to cause you just to walk away immediately. Sometimes you'll be able to look at it and just reach a conclusion on your own. They used misleading marketing language. I didn't even see the marketing piece that they were talking about, so I don't really care about that. But, if there aren't enough details in this item 9 to make reach a conclusion like that, then just ask further questions. But the disclosure
Now,
in this section is going to be helpful in reaching you.
what happens if you're like, what happens if you are with a large broker dealer, let's say like a Morgan Stanley or whatever? And I'm not picking on them. I'm just, again, I can identify with them. How does their item 9 look? Because if you do have, I don't know, 20,000 advisors in a normal distribution, not all of them are going to be stand-up people. And so item 9, do they, because you have to give an ADV to every prospect that's going to become a client. Is their item 9 like 1,000 pages? I mean, how do they do this?
So it's complicated is the unfortunate answer. For a firm like Morgan Stanley, this item 9 in the ADV Part 2A only speaks to issues involving the firm itself or the firm's management persons, like the people who are in charge of.
Oh, like the C-level guys.
Yeah. So
Or
if I'm
women.
an everyday employee of the firm and I did something that caused the firm to get fined, it's probably not making its way, or that caused me to get fined through the firm. That's not going to make its way into this item 9. If I have an ADV Part 2B, the brochure supplement, that biography we talked about in the last episode, I think it was,
Yeah.
it might show up there. It might show up on what's called my Form U4, which is my filing document that I file as a representative of a firm to get registered.
Yeah, but you're making it, not you yourself, but now, okay, I'm a client, I'm a consumer. This stuff is like kryptonite to me.
Places.
And now you want me to look at all these places? Come on. So if you, Brian, are working for Morgan Stanley, and let's say you did something, if you hand me the ADV of Morgan Stanley, it's not going to come up that you did something, is what you're saying. And then if you give
Not
me
the
the
2A.
one that's, and if you give me your bio one, you're saying it may or may not?
It depends on whether it meets the reporting criteria.
Okay, if it meets the reporting crisis, you have to.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'm assuming if it didn't meet the reporting crisis, criteria, it wasn't that big of a deal.
In the standpoint of the people who set those reporting criteria.
Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
that's right.
Look at that answer, buddy. You're like an
I
attorney.
am a lawyer. I've been doing this for a while.
All right. So that's disciplinary information. I would read it, and I don't think there's anything wrong. Sometimes you don't want to ask the advisor something because you may feel uncomfortable asking a question, because it may come across as, oh, I'm being a little untoward. But I don't think I think it's fair game to just say, hey, have there been any disciplinary actions? Because not all
No,
disciplinary actions are nefarious in nature. Some of them are just, like I said, ours was an administrative oversight, frankly, and 2 months later we fixed it. That kind of thing.
and some of them are, cases where another examiner who was looking at the same issue wouldn't have fined that firm or wouldn't
Yeah.
have pursued a settlement with that firm. It's just the nature of that examiner on that day. So it's important to ask the questions. You're doing the due diligence by reading the ADV. You'd be doing yourself a disservice by not asking the follow-up questions and not getting yourself to a point where you're comfortable that whatever is in this item 9
Yeah.
you're okay with.
Okay. Then item 10, financial industry activities and affiliations.
This is where a lot of conflicts are going to be disclosed. If I'm an advisor and I get compensated because I have an affiliated broker dealer and I make a lot of referrals to that broker dealer, or I have affiliated insurance agents or other investment advisors, other firms that I have referral relationships with that I get compensated for, most of those disclosures are going to be set forth here. And so this is one of the more important disclosures in terms of not just what's going on under the McLean RIA investment advisor umbrella, but who are the other firms in the McLean or under the McLean roof in the McLean family of companies,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and what conflicts are there going to be when I'm being handed off between potentially these multiple
Yeah,
entities or multiple engagements.
and so with McLean, since we're talking about them, there's a few affiliations that are kind of business. Now, Wade and I, again, I said it, are managing principals of McLean Asset Management. We are also managing principals of Retirement Researcher, which is an educational based RIA. We don't take assets to manage, but it's education driven. So sometimes, as I said in the previous episode, we run the balance of, are we providing education or are we now into the advice territory? Per Ryan's recommendation, we just were conservative and said, let's just make it an RIA. Okay. Uh, we have then the RISA, which is its own company as well. It's not an RIA, but it's a software company, right? And so technically there's a conflict because if McLean, if somebody's not going to be a client and we say, well, because they're do-it-yourselfers, and we say you may want to consider Retirement Researcher where you can learn all this stuff, technically we referred them to our other business, Retirement Researcher, and technically if you buy a subscription to Retirement Researcher, we've kind of sent business that way, and so we disclose that. The other piece is now we're doing insurance, we're doing annuities and things like that, and we do it through a subsidiary called McLean Insurance, effectively. And so if you're a client and we do say, hey, your RISA scored indicated that you want annuities, these are the options that make sense. Technically, we would be doing that business through McLean Insurance. Hence, McLean is referring out business to the McLean Insurance entity. So it's very transparent, and yeah, there's always potential for conflict. But this is how it works within the McLean structure, just because that's the ADV that we're reviewing. Now, the RISA, I guess technically, well, I'm just trying to think here. What would be the conflict? I guess, okay, the RISA. McLean owns, not McLean. Wade and I, majority shareholders of the RISA. We can tell McLean, buy a license of the RISA. Technically, there's 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 that interchange there. So it's tricky, right? I mean, we're really all one, but because we're separate companies, we have to kind of say that, hey, potentially there's this self referral system that we have. Did I say that properly, Ryan?
Well, it's not like it's a self referral, but the incentive is really to do business with one of the McLean companies as opposed to a non-McLean
Yeah,
company
okay.
to get the same product or service. That's the conflict, and that's what's disclosed in here. And it even goes beyond that, which I appreciate, to say not only is it a conflict, but no client, using the insurance example, no client's under any obligation to purchase any commission product from McLean Insurance or any of the McLean Insurance agents.
No, no,
Um,
no.
so the conflict exists. They may recommend insurance through McLean, but I'm under no obligation to do that. I can go find that same policy maybe at a totally different agency if I don't feel
No,
comfortable with that conflict. But the,
look,
the idea is that the conflict is disclosed, and I can get comfort, based on what conflicts are discussed here and how upfront and candid the firm is about where their conflicts are.
perfect. No, no, I get it. Something we didn't mention, I want to bring it up. I don't know if it's here. I don't think it's here, but it was in the fee section. Uh, the use of turnkey asset management providers. I think that's interesting from a fee standpoint, and I don't know if people are aware of this in the general audience. Look, McLean, we do our own investments, but there's a service by a lot of, it's a business to business service by a lot of investment advisors where they provide model portfolios that other advisors use. And so to some extent some people engage an advisor in a relationship to do the investments, but then they realize, oh, but they're not even actually doing the investments. They're actually outsourcing the investments to a service. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how they could identify that? Because I think that's kind of interesting, because not everyone is. I think a lot of advisors will be very candid about that, but some I don't think are, because they're thinking, oh, they're paying me to do the investments, and all of a sudden I'm outsourcing it to somebody else. That's an extra layer of fee, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and it could be a positive, it could be a
Yeah, exactly.
negative. It's really, again, we're not making a value judgment on people who use TAMPs, because maybe your expertise as an advisor is in planning and that long range goal setting, and less about doing research into individual securities and trying to get the market movements right. Maybe that's just not your expertise, and you know enough about yourself, you're self aware enough to know where your expertise ends and where you need to start relying on somebody else. So it could make all the sense in the world. The thing you want to look out for is when a firm does that, it's often going to come with extra costs to you as the client, because now there's not only the advisor that you've hired, but there's probably an advisor that sponsors the TAMP, or at least a vendor, maybe not a registered advisor, that sponsored the platform that they're using for asset management. There's going to be advisors who are managing those different models, the separate account managers that are made available on the TAMP platform as well, perhaps. They're all going to have their own fees associated with it, and those are going to be more often than not separate from and in addition to the fees that you're paying to your advisor that you initially hired. So it's not about good bad. It's about, are they doing it? Am I comfortable with that? And then what am I going to pay?
Yeah, and you should know that. It shouldn't be like a month into the relationship, oh, I didn't know you're not actually managing it. It's somebody else managing it that you're outsourcing. That's all. You just want to know.
Stay tuned for the riveting conclusion of our conversation next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.